Pastor Tim Stetson, and I'd like to welcome you to Life in Christ, where we share scriptures and a message from the Richford First Baptist Church. I'm so glad that you joined us for our program today. Our message will use God's Word as a foundation, and my hope is that His Word will have a special meaning to each one of you as you watch and listen. If you're ever in Richford and are not currently attending a church, we'd love to have you join us. We're located at 30 School Street, right in the center of town. School Street is located between the post office and the Pink Lady. Turn onto the street and come up the hill. The church is on the right-hand side of the street. Parking is found in front as well as around to the side. Our service starts at 9:45 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Now let's get to today's message. So today we're going to finish up our study about the bad girls of the Bible. Or this bad girl that we're doing right now. We're not totally out of the series, but on this message, and one who actually has her name published in the Bible, that name being Delilah. And of course, we're going to finish up talking about her co-star, and the co-star is Samson. And you will notice that there is a built-in time limit today, because I know that Shane is watching these two little short candles up there. So I expect at any point, just like a stage manager, he's going to stand up and he's going to go like this, which means that the candles are getting shorter and are burning down to where we can only see the silver. Now, when we left last week, Delilah had been going through this process. She, first of all, taken a bribe, right, to go and really up against Samson, even though up until this point she'd been kind of, playing out the fact that she loved him, but we know that he loved her without question, but we really don't know if she really loved him. We're not sure of all exactly the details, but she took the bribe just the same. And part of that bribe was to find out what needed to be done so that this immense strength that he had would be taken away. Now, where did that immense strength come from? Who did it come from, first of all? Okay, God. Whew. All right. Let's try that one again. Who did it come from? God. Okay, good. Excellent. And we know that the strength was imparted in this case through the length of his hair, correct? Through Samson. So now Delilah, she was one to beat around the bush, wasn't she? No, not really. She went right to him and she said, tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued. It's like, honey, you just came right to me and said, this is how I can make you a weak man. Right? So she didn't beat around the bush at all. Now Samson, though, he was up for the game, wasn't he? Because Samson was if you study Samson was a real riddle player. He loved playing riddle games. And apparently did this a lot. So he led her on a wild goose chase several times. In fact, so many times that probably most of us would have given up, right? But last week, as we were finishing up, we said, well, we might have given up, but Delilah was just like Mrs. Potiphar. Remember her? She wasn't giving up on anything, right? She just kept pounding away. And Mrs. Potiphar, her sister in seduction, well, the two of them were, if nothing else, they were a true example of persistence. Judges 16:15 says, then she said to him, so now she has gone through it all these times, and they've played this game back and forth, and he has said, if you do this, then I will lose my strength. And she did it, and she calls out to the folks, the Pharisees that are there, and son of a gun, if he lied to her. And he was just as strong as the time before. So she's now saying, how can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? Yeah, okay. How can you say I love you when you can't confide in me? This is the third time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. Whine, 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 whine. Can't you just hear it? How come? You didn't tell me that? No matter how you say the words that she said, it was just really clear at this point she's whining. Of course, she's probably thinking of all this money, right? And if she doesn't get this done, she's not going to have all this money. So, how come you aren't confiding me? Again, nothing with, don't you love me or anything like that. just as she did before. Judges 16:16 says, with such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. Nag, 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 prod, 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 whine, whine, whine. It was enough to wear any man down. And just like his first wife did 2 chapters earlier, Delilah, after all this nagging, guess what happened? She finally pushed even this big, huge, strong man to his limits. He had enough. Some translation, if you're reading in the scriptures, it says vexed to death. And he'd had enough. So now he tells her everything. Judges 17 says, so he told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. So 3 times he tells her an answer. 3 times she has the Philistines ready to pounce on him. Why would he allow the possibility of a 4th time? Can't you just hear him, though, shouting, all right, woman, you want to know the secret of my strength? Fine, I'll tell you. Anything to get you off my back. As soon as the truth was spoken, his doom was sealed. He was way too trusting. Or maybe, as Higgs says, he was way too dense to even realize where this was leading. Was it love or lust or what? You could almost feel sorry for him. Well, almost. Judges 16:18 says, when Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, come back once more, he has told me everything. So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. That's what she was looking for, right? The silver in the palms of their hands. Now, how did she know for sure that he had told the truth and nothing but the truth this time around? Right, he'd already been leading her on this real goose chase, but how did she know? Was it women's intuition? Was it the agonized expression on his face? Or just maybe it made sense? His hair was exceedingly long, and that kind of went along with never having had your hair cut. Did it all of a sudden make sense? Woohoo! Cut his hair, and all of a sudden, in an instant, his power is history. It's gone. Delilah didn't feel sorry for him. She felt rich. She knew that she was going to be rich. She was going to be so rich she would never have to worry about money again. She didn't need to care about anything else in her life because she was going to be rich. Our verses tell us that she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines. Oh, by the way, does that remind you of anyone else that we know? How about Judas? Remember, one of the names for Delilah is the female Judas. She turns on someone that she says that she loves. Judas did the same. But the biggest difference here is that Judas did it for how many pieces of silver? This is quiz time. 30 pieces of silver, right? So he did it for 30 pieces, but Delilah did it for thousands of shekels. But the amount doesn't matter, bottom line. Delilah was a bad girl at any price. She didn't value Samson's love. She didn't value Samson's life, and she didn't value his royalty to her. His loyalty, there's no R there, loyalty to her. Higgs is quoted as saying, the truth is the silver didn't represent Samson's price. It was her price. She was the one who was bought and sold. Her pride, her name, her reputation, however soiled they may have already been, were now shamed for eternity. And we know that because we're continuing to talk about her today. After putting him to sleep on her lap, the scriptures tell us, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Now, we might not trust this woman named Delilah. And we may not understand this, but who still trusted her? Samson, right? Samson still trusted her. He's resting after all of this. Can you picture this? He's now resting his head on her lap. So he's laying there. I mean, he's just wrapped up in love, and he's resting his head on her lap. He's in a form. Here is this big man, this strong man, with his head in her lap, which is a true sign of submission, right? First of all. Or maybe it was stupidity, but we weren't there, so we don't know that. But you would think that she probably would have used some drug or potion to put him out, right, now that she knows the truth. But what does she do? She lulled him to sleep. Any of you like to have hands, your head massaged and your hair massaged? Apparently Samson did, right? Because that's what she was doing, right? She was massaging through his hair and his head. And she put him to sleep. A few soft words. You make up your own words. And the massage of his head. And then bang, he was out like a light. And then what do you think she did next? She calls for a man to come and do the dirty work. She didn't even want to get her hands dirty. She's there, she's put him to sleep, so she didn't want to move Samson, is what she would tell you. I don't want to move him because I might wake him up. And that, the thing is that if you wake up a big brute of a man like Samson, it's probably not going to be a good thing, is it? Especially if someone is just about getting ready to cut that hair. That wouldn't be really good. But you can imagine it wouldn't be fun. So then it says in verse 20, then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Because what happened when that hair got cut? His Nazirite vow was that, in fact, even though he didn't make the vow of his own choice, the Nazirite vow was that your hair shall never be cut. And that's where his strength came from. So even though all this time he had been all of these things, deep within him was still the love of God. And God gave him the strength. And as soon as the hair was cut, the strength of God was gone. You see, he woke up thinking that everything was as it was before. Verse 21 says, then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza, binding him with bronze shackles. They set him to grinding grain in the prison. You see, our scriptures tell us that he was bound in those bronze shackles. Had his eyes gouged out, and then he was thrown into prison. Samson. Okay, here's a lesson for all of us, wrapped up in those words. And a lesson that Samson learned. He discovered the hardest lesson of all about the consequences of sin. Separation from God. A true separation from God. Folks say, well, so that means that I've lost my salvation. You know the answer to that when we talk about it a lot. No, it doesn't. But you're separated from God, just as Samson was in this situation. If we continue reading the scriptures, we find that Delilah entirely disappears from the pages of the Bible. But don't despair. She didn't disappear from the face of the earth. In fact, she became a household word, didn't she? She became a one-name wonder. This name, Delilah, will always be an everlasting curse on the lips of people. Now, Delilah disappeared, but Samson sure didn't. He made one more earth-shaking appearance when his enemies gathered to celebrate their triumph over him. And guess what? They didn't cut his hair this time. And what happens when you don't keep your hair cut or trimmed? Can you say that a little bit louder? I'm afraid I lost you. It grows, right? It comes back, doesn't it? Except for those places where some of us are losing it and it doesn't, but it grows. It comes back. And so is Samson's hair coming back. It says in verse 22, and we're going to read that right straight through to 31, just so you have an idea of what happens. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. You see, the temple was bulging at the seams with Philistines that day, because they, of course, came to see, this prize fight had been won. They had Samson and had taken care of it. He was being brought out to be paraded in front of all the people, of all the mighty strong men who had been weakened by a woman. And they were going to parade him around, weren't they? That's what the Philistines were going to do on that particular day. Now, the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon. Oh, that was also that. Dagon was one of their gods, right? And they were going to do that. They were going to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, "Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands." When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain." Now remember that if you think about this a little bit, Samson still has a job to do. God's not done with Samson yet, is what we're going to see. Because these people, these Philistines, they were worshiping all kinds of other gods, weren't they? They were worshiping, especially Dagon was only one of many. So they weren't worshiping the God, our God, capital G. In fact, even in your Bible, as you read about Dagon, it's God with a small g. It says, when the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain." Was Delilah there? We don't know for sure. It doesn't tell us in Scripture. But one of the things that we do know is that God was there, and God was there with Samson. You see, Samson's dependence on God was growing right along with that hair that was growing back. Samson, even with his failings, still had a heart for God, while our bad girl Delilah had a heart only for herself and for money. The Lord, though, took that treachery and he used it for good. Because what he did is, in all of this, is he brought Samson to his knees in humility. He took someone who he had really entrusted with doing the right thing for his entire life, and knowing that he hadn't, he brought him to his knees. He brought him to probably the lowest place that he could be, so that he could bring him back and continue to use him. Verse 25, while they were in high spirits, they shouted, bring out Samson to entertain us." So they called Samson out of prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them." Big stone pillars. And he was playing the weak man card now, wasn't he? I'm going to lean against those pillars because it's so difficult. Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord. In his humility, he reaches out to the Lord. "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me one more time. And let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than when he lived. Then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had led Israel 20 years. He did God's work in the end after this entire journey at a time of humility. As he pulls the temple down of those who, no matter what they did, would not reach out to God. So what is it that we can learn from Delilah, and yes, probably even more importantly from Samson as well? The love of a man and or a woman is to be treasured. When another declares their love for us, we should handle them with the utmost care, even if the feelings are not mutual. For the sake of future marital happiness, or to leave their hearts intact for another person down the pike, let's be gentle and trustworthy with their brave declarations. Proverbs 31:11 says, her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. No matter how much we think that it is. Number 2 is silver and gold aren't very good company. What Delilah gained in good, she surely lost in relationship, I would say. The same thing can happen to us when we pursue a materialistic lifestyle and leave behind dear friends in our frenzy of accumulation. And it can happen, can't it? We get so focused on what the stuff that we want that we leave everybody in our wake. We leave everybody behind us. Money separates people more often than it joins them. Proverbs 22:1 says, a good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. Weaknesses. Any of us have weaknesses? That's rhetorical. No, none at all, right? How are we doing on the candle? Okay, good. All right, we're gonna do it, I think. This side of the table may burn down first, but we're gonna get there. But weaknesses. We all have weaknesses, don't we? There's something somewhere that somebody would tell us is a weakness, right? Weaknesses need to be strengthened, not exposed. Hey, did you hear about so-and-so? Did you see what they did? Yeah, they can't ever. We see that, don't we? Very often. And then folks that are really looking for those weaknesses, what do? They go in for the strike, right? Get them while they're down. On purpose or by mistake, the people we're closest to will eventually reveal their vulnerable spots and their weaknesses. And we need to always fight the urge to use that against them as a weapon. We must always focus away from that. We need to not use that for public embarrassment or even in jest. Does that person have an unusual mannerism, a phobia, a quirky private habit, a deep-seated concern? It says here in my notes, it says zip those lips. I think that zip those lips, probably if we put it, and maybe it may offend you more, but it is shut up. If they shared this with you, they felt comfortable sharing it with you. They felt comfortable because they trust you. Zip the lips. Keeping someone else's limitations a secret between the two of you will knit you closer together. In the workplace, it's a step toward friendship and respect. In marriage, it's a tool for intimacy. In all things, it's a way to honor the Lord. 2 Corinthians 12:10 says, that is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. When we're humble, when we're in that time of humility, as Samson was, even in that, at the weakest point in his life. This is a person who could walk by trees and push them out of the way. Even at that point, the weakest time in his life, he was strong. For a happy home, keep your scissors out of reach. We might not chop off all 7 braids at once, thereby reducing our strong man or woman's power to nil, but how many among us have snipped at their spouse's sense of worth and value by undermining them with not so gentle jabs at their masculinity or their femininity? I probably have, and if I have, I apologize for that up front. And it's probably even worse because, sometimes I do it publicly. But sometimes we poke and we prod at our partner. at the one that we love and loves us the most, and you know what? You could never do that. Or what'd you do that for? You know, it comes flying out of us, doesn't it? Keep our scissors out of reach. The world cuts people down enough. The world that we live in cuts people down enough. Let's do our part. Let's think about it and work at it to not cut them down, because it's not just our spouse or others, it's the people around us. We need to be ready to build each other up with emotional bricks and mortar. We need to reach our arms around one another and build each other up. Right? Y'all still with me? Because we have this love for one another. And we say that we have this love for one another, right? So how do we prove that love for one another? We reach around and lift one another up. Because not all of us can do all of the same things, right? We can't all do them equally well. We're not all singers necessarily. We love to make a joyful noise. We're not all singers. We're not all this. We're not all that. We don't all, drive at 120 miles an hour and feel comfortable with that. It's like we all do things different. Proverbs 14:1 says, "The wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands the foolish one tears hers down." Some valuable lessons for us from Delilah, and yes, a bad boy of the Bible who had his opportunity to be humbled before God, Samson. Next week we'll learn from one who is generous to a fault. And she's only bad for a moment, so she kind of makes a turnaround, and I'm talking about Sapphira. We're going to once again learn what it is the Lord shares with us through the words from His Scriptures about these characters in the Bible. Amen.